Passage is salt of the earth, and I'm so inspired by the simple element of salt. So Mother was recently in Death Valley in the USA, where she went to the Holy Ground to pray. It's quite interesting that Father established a holy ground here in the Death Valley, as nothing can grow. It's arid, it's desolate, and no life can prosper because it's so salty there. But reflecting on this, salt's actually a really important part of human history. My brother Isaac would like this part of the talk. So when I was looking into salt and its importance, it was actually more valuable than gold and local currencies at times, especially in the Civil War in America. Those who worked in the salt mines were exempt from fighting. Salt was so important in preserving food before refrigeration. And in fact, those workers wanted to be paid in salt rather than in the local currency at the time, because it was so valuable. In today's society, though, salt is a common household item. It's fairly cheap. But historically, salt was so important in developing food and for cleansing areas. But now it's mainly used for taste, isn't it? So salt has three functions. The first is to preserve. Before refrigeration, the main way of preserving your food was curing it with salt or smoking your food. So salt was super valuable in making sure that your meats and your vegetables could last before refrigeration. Salt can also cleanse, so perhaps if you cut yourselves or you have an infection, then you want to rinse with salt. You want to cleanse yourself with salt. And also then salt enhances flavour. It can make our food taste better. I think my mum's not too familiar with salt. We weren't allowed to put it on our food growing up, but for those of you who do use salt, it enhances flavour and it's very useful. So Mother was praying at this holy ground, and she's hoping that we can become salt of the earth. Matthew in chapter 5 verses 13 to 16 says, "You are salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under the foot." So Mother's asking blessed families to be the salt of the earth. We can try and preserve this earth, we can try and cleanse this earth, and we can try and enhance human experience on this earth. When you're cooking with salt, you don't need too much to enhance the flavour. If you have, for example, maybe a kilogram of pasta, you might only need a few tablespoons or a few pinches of salt. And our community is very similar. We're not large in numbers, but like salt, we can be extremely powerful if we work together. We can be extremely potent if we harness our potential. However, as Jesus said, once salt loses its taste, it loses its saltiness, its function is no longer of any use. Kyle and we had a talk in Birmingham talking about pruning, and Jesus also said, if you're not a healthy branch, you get cast out and you're only useful for firewood. Kyle says, oh, it's extremely harsh, isn't it, that, you're either trampled on or you're thrown into fire if you have no use. But if we think of our spiritual lives and our spiritual journey, if we're not growing, if we're not alive, then we must be stagnant then. If we're not salty, then we're not achieving our potential, we're not fit for purpose then. So although this sounds harsh, it really reminds us that we need to be growing, we need to be alive, we need to have our saltiness. So Mother's expecting then that as blessed families that we can enhance the communities we're in, and we can cleanse and purify the troubles of the world, and also then we can preserve God's love, God's dream, just like salt. This can be extremely difficult though. Salt is from the earth. Similarly, we need to be from the earth, but different at the same time. We need to be alive and part of this world, but not from this world at the same time. And this is quite an interesting difficulty. Nadia was sharing at the start that she's consumed by work and studies as an accountant almost till midnight, 1 a.m. So we can easily be consumed by the world, but somehow we need to be born in the world, but not from this world at the same time. I want to share with you the story of Job, and how Job was from this earth, but not part of this earth at the same time. So Job was an interesting character. He was a family man. He was highly regarded by his family members. They would come to him for feasts. They would come for advice. They would come for counsel. And he was a perfect example of parenting, or the role of grandparents in a family. I know we meet in my mother's house, and one of the first things we do, one of the first things I do is open the fridge and see if there's any goodies in there. And Job was this kind of person, welcoming his family, his friends to his home, inviting them for meals, sharing words of advice, and being this fatherly figure. He was also very good at business as well. He owned lots of land, lots of animals, and he was very fruitful with his work, and he showed that he had dominion over his lands, his animals, his outbuildings, and his family. I think this story of Job is highly misunderstood within our community and within Christian communities. Often the story of Job is told in a way which God is testing Job. Look how God survived, look how Job overcame God's tests, or is used to talk about indemnity. And I have a bone to pick with this term, indemnity. So indemnity is a legal term traditionally in British language. I encountered it just last week when my car insurance needed to be renewed. And in there it mentions indemnity. If I crash, then the insurance company needs to pay indemnities to the person I crashed into to essentially fix the car and to resolve the damages. So that's why we pay a premium. We pay for our insurance. So then if something does happen, we can indemnify the crash or the accident we're in. So to indemnify something is to restore something to how it was. If, for example, I broke my laptop, I smashed it now, I need to indemnify that, fix my laptop, and to make it back to its normal function. So this term indemnity then, so if something goes wrong, we need to fix it. There's a big difference between indemnity and conditions. So because of the Messiah, because of Jesus, because of true parents, they've indemnified this hole that we've been in because of the human fall. So we're standing on flat ground now. So it's important that we make conditions, and that is really building on this flat ground, building a life with God and building a future with God. So there's a difference between indemnifying something and building conditions, progressively moving forward with God. And I think these two terms have been confused within our holy community and used interchangeably when actually they're two separate things. And I think that this tells us a lot about where we are at as a community at times, where we see suffering automatically as indemnity. And I think perhaps in the past we had to do lots of conditions with father, with mother to indemnify things. But somehow that's shown us that our attitudes towards conditions is automatically linked to suffering somehow. But actually our attitudes to conditions and making effort with God should be a heartistic one that I want to develop and I want to grow with God, although that can be difficult. Unfortunately, someone phoned me up really upset, and I'll try and put this in a cryptic way. So they phoned me upset because another member had said to them, all these bad things are happening to you because of indemnity. Your family have to indemnify something, which is completely wrong, a complete distortion of the principle. God is a God of love, God is a heavenly parent. There's no way that he would punish us for us to indemnify or to make up for a mistake. And this is the essence of the story of Job, that he shows us that it's not God who's punishing him, it's not God who's putting all this misfortune onto Job. It's in fact Satan, and God is there trying to prop you up, trying to support you, and trying to help you fulfill your portion of responsibility. So if something bad happens to you, we encounter misfortune, I 100% believe that is not indemnity, that is not God punishing you because you have to try and restore something. And that's the main takeaway message from this story of Job. So interestingly then, how does Satan try and destroy Job? So in the book of Job, it highlights that Satan was going up and down the earth and back and forth the spiritual realms, and he was looking on the lookout. And interestingly, that when Job meets God, then Satan appears as well at the same time. It reminds me of the time in the Garden of Eden where Adam and Eve are growing towards God, things are going well, and then Satan comes. Perhaps in your own lives you've noticed that when you've been close to God, or the potential to be close to God, then Satan appears, and then there's a fork in the road and you have to decide which way to go. I find this really interesting. Perhaps this is linked to what it means to fear God, that if God is close, or you're close to achieving something, then Satan can be there at the same time. So maybe that's why in the Bible it states that people fear God. If you're close to God, then you're perhaps close to Satan at the same time as well. But Satan comes and God says, Job is a man of God. He is, part of my family. Do as you wish, but don't kill him. And I think that this is also misunderstood, that people argue that God is allowing Satan to test Job and to try and destroy Job. But the principle clearly states that God cannot intervene in evil. He cannot be associated with evil, otherwise he loses his dominion, his wholeness, his righteousness. So of course then God cannot intervene, but he has to allow Satan to carry on, and for Satan to implement his will. As this world is a fallen world and we are under Satan's dominion, God can't directly intervene, so he has no choice but to let Satan test Job and to let Satan torment Job. So interestingly as well, when we read how Satan tests Job, first he destroys his land, he starts to take away his farm animals, and we see that this is actually the destruction of the third blessing, to have dominion. So he starts breaking down Job's dominion of his farmland, his agriculture, his houses. Next, then Satan torments Job. Job loses family members in a big gust of wind, a hurricane, and his family diminishes, which is testing the second blessing to multiply. And lastly then, Job suffers great boils on his feet, all the way up to his head, and sores. Have any of you stepped on leather before? Yeah, really painful. So imagine having big boils on the bottom of your feet, which should be excruciating, often mentally more painful than just stepping on leather. And again, Satan's trying to break down the first blessing then to be fruitful. So we see that Satan is really breaking down Job on all of these fronts which God has raised Job up on. And God's purpose for us is to be fruitful, to multiply and have dominion. But here Satan comes and he breaks down each of those blessings systematically, reducing Job to almost nothing. So Job's attitude to this then, he's complaining, he's saying, this is so difficult, why me, why is this happening to me? I know God, and I know God is real, and God is my heavenly parent, yet I've been tormented, I've lost my physical health has been broken down, my family have been killed, and I've lost my riches, I've lost my land, which I have dominion over. Here there's a really great few verses on friendship and the importance of having good friends and the importance of having a good community and support network around you. When I was first reading this, I actually was really impressed by the three of Job's friends and their response, until I got to the end of the chapter, and you see then that God tells his friends off. I'm going to have to read these names because I will get them wrong. So Job's friends who came to console him were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Shuhite. So they're the elders of the village, along with Job. As I mentioned, Job was a respected member of the community. They come to visit Job and they try and console him, and they try and they question him, saying, is God really doing this to you? You've been a good person. Have you deserved this? Perhaps this is God's will. And they're trying to level with Job. They're almost like a sounding board. And Job then is complaining and saying, I've lost everything. I've been destroyed. I've lost my family members. I'm miserable. I'm experiencing the wrath of God. But actually, as friends, their responsibility was to bring the truth, to bring God's truth, and to say to Job very clearly what was happening. And what was happening was that this was not from God. Job was blaming God, but it was not God who brought this suffering upon him. And going back to salt then, how this relates to Mother's message. We are all like grains of salt, but when we come together, we're even more salty, we're more potent together. A grain of salt is so much more powerful when it's part of the whole package. So his friends had a responsibility to come together and, if you like, to be part of this whole, to be individual grains which are part of the whole. And this is my favourite quote, which God says to Job. Can you pull in a leviathan with a fish hook, or tie down its tongue with a rope? So Job's complaining, and then God comes and he says, look what I can do. I could bring in a leviathan with a rope, with a hook, I could tie down its tongue with a rope. And he goes on with these extravagant metaphors of how powerful God is, which for me we see it as, perhaps this is God being arrogant, coming to show his power. But actually it shows us that God is ultimately good, and God wishes us to harness the same power. God wishes us that we can emulate him in the same way, that we could pull in leviathans with a fish hook, we could tie the leviathans' tongues with rope. And I find that so inspiring for ourselves as a community. Unfortunately, there's lots of health issues within the community. We have an aging community. Yeah, there's so much hope that we can harness God's power, we can harness God's goodness, and we can build a better future if we only work with God, and if only we side with God. So his friends then, rather than just consoling Job, they had a responsibility to reveal God's nature, to reveal God's truth, that it is not God who has been tormenting Job, but in fact Satan, and that it was God who was propping up Job this whole time, that he allowed him to endure. A second misconception I want to address is that I often hear people say, God will give you a challenge that you can handle, or it's God who's giving you this challenge, or it's God who's giving you that challenge. But in fact, since we are part of this world, which is a fallen world under Satan's dominion, it's Satan who's challenging us, it's Satan who's given us this misfortune, it's Satan who's putting this trauma and troubles upon us. And the divine principle clearly states that there's no freedom without principle, responsibility, and accomplishment. I have to thank Shazad actually for showing me how to study and read books. He showed me his texts, which have loads of post-it notes coming out of them, loads of scribbles, and that's something I've tried to implement within my own studies and readings. And this point really stood out to me, that there is no freedom without principle, responsibility, and accomplishment. So we get tested by evil, we get tested by Satan, we might face physical misfortune, financial misfortune, family misfortune, and God cannot directly intervene. I believe that God props us up enough for us to complete our portion of responsibility. So let me give you an example. We've started to begin to toilet train Eris at a young age. We have to physically put her on the potty, and she may pee sometimes, she may poop sometimes. But when she does, we make a massive celebration out of it. Wow, well done, Eris, you did that, you peed, you pooed. In fact, we put her on the potty, we took a nappy off. But we make her feel like that's her achievement, she's achieved something. So God, in a similar sense, does the same. We face misfortune, God tries his best to prop us up enough so we can complete our responsibility, and enough that we have the freedom to do so, and then we can feel a sense of accomplishment together because God has propped us up enough that we can achieve and feel accomplished, and then be with God. Hi, welcome. Do you want to have a seat? Right, okay. So because of God propping us up then, we can overcome, we can achieve and have a sense of accomplishment with God, because God's principle is absolute and perfect, so we can't directly intervene with this evil, but he can do enough to prop us up and support us so we can achieve, we can feel this sense of accomplishment. And this is what we see in the story of Job. Despite him being completely destroyed, broken down, God was still propping him up enough that he has his responsibility and the freedom then to enjoy the accomplishments together with God. So what does this mean for us then as a holy community? To be honest with you, when we had Pastor Ron giving Sunday services, I always used to feel so judged sitting there, and I always used to feel like I was this rotten apple when I went to the spirit world. So Father says, you will enter the spirit world in the form of your spiritual self, which has recorded your life on earth with 100% accuracy. Your spirit will show plainly whether you led a right life of goodness or a wormy, rotten life of sinfulness. Maybe this was a reflection of me as a teenager, but I really felt like I am this wormy, rotten apple, and coming to Sunday services shed light on myself, and this is going to be me when I go to the spirit world. But actually, I think this is a false dichotomy of the spirit world, that either you are completely rotten or you are a fresh, ripe apple. You're probably a little bit of both, depending on the moment. But this really shows us then that with God and his power, his goodness, his grace, we can overcome challenges. That God is actually taking the majority of the burden, but we just have a responsibility to achieve, to fulfill our portion of responsibility, and then we can celebrate that with God. God's principle is a principle of accomplishment, that we can accomplish something together. There's something about Father's speeches in 2005 and 2006 which I find really edifying. So here Father's opening Chongjon Palace, and he says, "In the position of the Master you may become the liberated King of liberation, the freed King of freedom, and the sage and virtuous King of eternal prosperity and peace for millions of generations to come, so that you can become the owner and the King who reigns and flourishes evermore." So with this in mind then, we need to be like salt in this earth. We need to be from this earth, but separated from this earth at the same time. We need to preserve God's principle of creation, and we need to cleanse and sanctify this world so God's love can come, and through that then we can enhance this human experience and this spiritual experience together. Thank you.